Hi everyone, I hope you're doing great. So today I'm doing something that's a bit different. I want to talk about 4 things I've frequently observed over my time in the vegan community. Now, it's not like all vegans do these things, and some of the things we'll discuss in today's video are things I've also done in the past. But I think if we can do less of these things, then we'll be more successful at achieving our goals. I do, of course, think that being vegan is a really awesome thing. We have found out about the suffering endured by animals and decided to do something about it. Something that challenges the status quo and results in us being criticised and ridiculed by the majority. Anyone who, despite these difficulties, continues to be vegan because they don't want to exploit animals or cause them to suffer, deserves a pat on the back. But in this video, I will instead focus on things that I think many of us, including myself at times, can get better at. Like a lot of communities, the vegan community can sometimes be a bit of an echo chamber. Ultimately, we want to hold as many true beliefs and as few false beliefs as possible, and as vegans, we want our messaging to be effective so that we can reduce as much animal suffering as possible. And with that said, let's jump into it. Okay, number 1. Vegans should stop making empirically inaccurate or unsupported claims. Please don't cancel me. It's understandable in a way. People want to see change happen as quickly as possible, so it might be tempting to exaggerate claims to convince more people to join your cause. And we often create these community bubbles where claims often get regurgitated without sufficient fact-checking. I think that when vegans make incorrect claims, it really does undermine our credibility, and therefore hinders our movement. The truth is compelling enough. We don't need to lie or exaggerate in order to reach our goals. As an example of what I think is misinformation, some vegans claim that you don't need to take supplements to be healthy as a vegan. I don't think this is true. The evidence suggests that vegans should in fact be supplementing vitamin B12. And while it's true that vitamin B12 deficiencies are common in meat eaters too, evidence suggests that vegans are more likely to develop a B12 deficiency than non-vegans. So we should supplement vitamin B12 directly or eat fortified foods like mock meats. If we convince people to go vegan and they don't supplement vitamin B12, they're going to run into problems down the line, which means that our misinformation may result in them being less likely to stick to their vegan diet in the long term. Of course, I'm not a nutrition expert, so for those of you who are interested, you'll find an NHS resource in the description box of this video that will inform you on how to live healthy as a vegan. Supplementation or consuming fortified foods isn't something that's specific for vegans. I mean, meat eaters consume breakfast cereals that are fortified with vitamin D and drink milk that's fortified with vitamin A. And where I live, in the UK, it's recommended that everyone takes a vitamin D supplement from October to March because it's unlikely that we're getting enough from sun exposure. Of course, in recent months, most of us are spending a lot more time at home to try and prevent the spread of the coronavirus, so it's even more important that we supplement vitamin D. In other words, don't be afraid of supplementation, and don't tell people that supplementation isn't necessary on a vegan diet, because vegans in particular should make sure they're getting enough vitamin B12 via supplementation. And that's okay.
Hi guys, my name is Jack. I supplement vitamin B12. I don't inject it or anything, but I take it every day, orally.
Hey Jack.
Hey Jack. Hey Jack.
Hey Jack.
It seems that some vegans really do exaggerate the health benefits of a vegan diet. Some people talk as if it's some kind of cure-all for health conditions. And look, there's no question that eating less animal products and eating more plants can significantly improve your health. We have scientific evidence that vegans on average are less likely to develop certain cancers, heart disease, and obesity. It's well accepted that a plant-based diet is healthier than a typical Western diet. But documentaries like What the Health have painted an exaggerated picture that is often regurgitated by vegans. It's important that we try not to be dogmatic and that we refrain from assuming a specific claim is true simply because it reinforces a belief we already hold. I think it's really important that we don't undermine our credibility by spreading misinformation, exaggerations, and fear-mongering. We have enough empirical evidence to know that being vegan is doable and perfectly healthy. We don't need to exaggerate, and doing so is probably harmful overall. Okay, let's move on to point number 2. It's common for meat eaters to say that humanity has killed and eaten animals for most of its evolutionary history. And they're right about that, but many go on to make the argument that because eating meat is natural, it's not something we should stop doing. Now, some vegans will engage in a debate about whether or not eating meat is natural. Modern farms are the result of aggressive artificial breeding that results in animals producing far more meat, dairy, and eggs than they would naturally. Chickens raised for meat today are over 4 times larger than they were in the 1960s. Farmed animals are given numerous antibiotics, hormones, and other synthetic chemicals, and they're farmed in environments that are unrecognisable from the diverse ecosystems where their ancestors lived. But virtually no modern food is natural. Pretty much all organisms used for food, including plants, have been selectively bred to improve their quality, their productivity, and their edibility. Modern crops like bananas and corn are unrecognisable when placed next to their natural counterparts. So while it's true that our current consumption of animals isn't natural, advocates should remember that naturalness is not what people should care about. Even if killing animals and eating their bodies is natural, that doesn't mean that it's a morally acceptable thing to do. To definitively conclude that something is good because it's natural is known by philosophers as an appeal to nature, a well-known logical fallacy. Murder and rape and abuse have existed throughout most of our evolutionary history, but that doesn't mean that they're good or desirable. In fact, we do unnatural things, like giving people medicine or providing natural disaster relief, to defend people against the unfavourable state of the natural world and humanity. It's not uncommon to hear vegans say that drinking cow's milk is unnatural. And yes, it is unnatural. But so are vaccines, refrigerators, toilets, and air conditioning. Things that literally exist because they're better solutions to our needs than what nature gave us. In other words, meat eaters should stop using eating meat is natural as an argument for buying meat, and vegans should stop using drinking milk is unnatural as an argument against drinking milk. Naturalness is irrelevant to the discussion on how we ought to behave. An unhelpful approach I sometimes see in the vegan community is to have a very black and white perspective. For example, it's not uncommon to hear vegan activists say, you're either vegan or you're an animal abuser. I think this is a very simplistic way of looking at the situation, and it's likely to be very counterintuitive and alienating to most non-vegans. Now imagine if someone used to be a heavy meat eater, and after watching footage of factory farming, they've gradually cut out every animal product they eat, apart from cheese. Now if someone tells you this and you respond with, well you're either vegan or you're an animal abuser, that might feel very disempowering for them. We should acknowledge how far people have come and positively reinforce desirable behaviours. If someone has empathised with animals and decided to make significant lifestyle changes, that's great, even if they haven't reached veganism yet. I want to show you a clip from a talk by Tobias Leenaert.
These are your meals in a year. That's 1,095 meals. Suppose that one of those meals is not vegan. You see the little dot there? One of those meals is not vegan. And that means that there's still potatoes and vegetables and there's maybe like a fish or whatever. So 1/3 of that meal is not vegan, right? So that's 0.03% of your meals is not vegan. Is that enough to say to a person, no, you're not vegan? You don't belong to the club. You cannot call yourself a vegan, even though they are so much closer to being vegan than to anything else, than to vegetarian or whatever.
I think a more encouraging, supportive attitude is more likely to lead to this person cutting out more animal products, rather than suggesting that this person's efforts are worthless. If we suggest that everyone who isn't vegan is an animal abuser, if we set the bar that high to avoid the label animal abuser, we're going to alienate people who aren't there, while we should be encouraging them. If our language suggests that there's no difference between eating meat 3 times a day and being vegan apart from honey, we might make it more likely that people don't try to change at all, because veganism might seem too difficult or perhaps even impossible for people who are currently eating animal products for every meal of every day. Obviously, I promote a strong vegan message, and my values haven't changed. I still want to help as many animals as possible. But I think we often create too much division between ourselves and non-vegans. Rather than seeing one as an animal abuser and the other as a saint, why don't we stress our shared goal of helping animals? We're going to be more convincing to non-vegans if we have a shared perspective and reinforce the shared goal that most people have of making the world a better place. And just to be clear, I understand why some vegans call all non-vegans animal abusers. If you buy these products, you are contributing to animal abuse. If we say that's enough to label someone as an abuser, then yes, technically that's right. I mean, it seems reasonable to call someone an abuser who is causing animals to be abused. But the issue is that it's not going to be convincing for most people. We should avoid directly insulting people during outreach, and I don't think this black and white thinking applied to people is going to help us reach our goal. If you buy 1 slice of cheese per year, you're not contributing as much as someone who buys meat 3 times a day. That's not to say it's morally acceptable to buy cheese once a year. It's just that if we don't differentiate between these two behaviours, I think it makes us seem unrelatable to non-vegans. I think there's too much focus on people who are 90% of the way there. There is far more value on focusing on the people who consume lots of animal products. For example, getting the person who eats cheese once a year to stop isn't going to help as many animals as getting the heavy meat eater to cut his consumption in half. And that's not to say that we shouldn't try to convince the person to give up cheese. We should encourage them and give them resources, because they're probably going to be low-hanging fruit for further behaviour change. But if we care about helping as many animals as possible, we should focus our time and our efforts and our conversations within the vegan community on influencing the people who are consuming animal products every day. Getting 10 people to be 50% vegan is going to help more animals than getting one person to be 100% vegan. And if our goal is to end animal farming, we need to seriously consider how we're going to get there. Are we going to get there by convincing everyone to go vegan? No. Some people just aren't willing to go vegan in the current society. But we need as many people as possible to work together in the fight to abolish animal farming. You might think it's unrealistic to suggest that non-vegans will help us get there, but research suggests that 47% of US adults support a ban on slaughterhouses. If you were just looking at the number of vegans in the world, you would never imagine that there was this much support for a ban on slaughterhouses, but there is. And it suggests that we may be able to take radical steps to ending animal farming with the support of people who aren't willing to go vegan right now. And it would be tactically unwise to ignore that opportunity for support or to prevent that momentum from growing by labelling these people as animal abusers. This black and white thinking is also apparent in the way vegans sometimes treat each other. Online at least, there seems to be a lot of vegans calling each other out for not being true vegans or 100% vegan, and people are acting as if they know with certainty what other people's true intentions are. It seems to me that some vegans are more focused on criticising other vegans who aren't perfect, rather than engaging with meat eaters about animal suffering. Some people learn about the early proponents of the vegan movement, like Donald Watson or Tom Reagan, and they find early definitions of veganism and then criticise other vegans or activists who aren't adhering closely enough to a philosophy from the 1940s. Similar to how fundamentalist Christians will call out other Christians for not adhering closely enough to their religious scripture. And some of these people act as if the activists who are in line with Donald Watson or Tom Reagan's philosophy are correct and pure, and the other vegans just simply don't understand veganism properly. Ultimately, what's important isn't that we feel pure or correct, or that we adhere perfectly to a philosophy from a pioneer in the 1940s. What's important is that we help the animals as effectively as possible. The outcomes for the animals should be the focus, not the purity of the vegans. And we can acknowledge that it's near impossible to live life without causing some harm or exploitation to non-human animals. The ways our purchasing behaviours affect the lives of others is complex, and there are a lot of unknowns. We know that even purchasing plants causes harm to wild animals, and there's probably going to be some harm caused to humans in the production line of a lot of the products we buy. And the focus on the purity of the vegan is not only losing sight of what really matters, but it's a bit of an impossible game to win. To illustrate my point, take a look at this.
It's not easy to see what 100% vegan is, okay? There are, by definition, almost fuzzy borders. Like if you look at this scale here, it goes from like big ingredients to micro ingredients, like things that you can't even see. The question is, how far are we going there, and at what point is somebody vegan, okay? So you could say that you're only a vegan if you have studied by heart this little book with 300 pages of possibly non-vegan ingredients, okay? This is hard to do. I guess nobody is vegan, but somebody could learn the book by heart and say, I'm the true vegan, okay? And so you can have a situation where for every vegan, there's another vegan who is more vegan. And we can all tell each other, you're not vegan, and this person tells the other one, you're not vegan, etc. We can play that game ad nauseum, ad infinitum. And it's not productive, it's not useful.
An example of a focus on purity rather than outcomes for the animals is the opposition to vegans who consume non-vegan products they find during dumpster diving. If someone looks through a bin and finds some cow's milk and they decide to take it home and drink it, is it really appropriate to say that they're not vegan anymore? Are we really going to say that, even though their consumption has no direct impact on demand and therefore doesn't harm any animals? It is an interesting question to discuss, though, because you could make an argument that there are some negative knock-on effects of consuming animal products you find in bins. For example, it can be argued that by doing so, you're normalising animal product consumption. And so someone might see you and then be more likely to buy more animal products themselves. Although I'm not sure how much people will be encouraged to buy meat if they see someone eating it out of a bin.
We've got a bit of chicken. You've got to avoid the bits of hair.
Yummy. But there could be other factors too. For example, psychological research suggests that when people consume animal products, they assign fewer mental faculties to farmed animals than people who eat a plant-based snack. This suggests that consuming animal products, even out of a bin, might reduce your concern for farmed animals, which might increase the likelihood that your behaviour changes in ways that does harm animals. So we can certainly make arguments as to why consuming animal products from a bin may cause more harm down the line, and there's nothing wrong with discussing that. But I think suggesting that they're not truly vegan, even though they might care deeply about animal suffering, is unfair and unhelpful. But anyway, I don't want to spend any more time talking about bins. My point here is that this black and white thinking is probably unhelpful, and our attention needs to be on how we can best help animals, not on calling people out who don't live up to our standards of what a true vegan is. I do want to say that the question of how we can most effectively advocate for animals is obviously a very complex one. I have tried to think about this from both sides, and I'm aware that in my early days of veganism, I was much less pragmatic than I'm coming across in this video. Of course, I could be wrong about all of this, and you're welcome to try and change my mind if you disagree with me. Okay, so another point is the lack of empathy some vegans have for meat eaters. Obviously, vegans are very empathetic towards animals, and that's why most people go vegan in the first place. But some vegans do seem to have a lack of empathy in the way they talk about and treat non-vegans. Now, perhaps you're thinking, why on earth should we have empathy for perpetrators of violence? It's the animals who deserve our empathy. They're the ones being tortured on factory farms because Dave wants to have bacon and eggs for breakfast. And to address that, I want to show you another clip from Tobias.
And I can imagine that there's people thinking here like, oh, there's definitely some people we don't need empathy for. People who are really, really not nice. Can you think of some people like that? They were recently in the news. These people, right? Do we need empathy for them? Well, I think it might be useful. And I just want to illustrate with this guy. This is Daryl Davis. He's a black guy. And he grew up outside of America, and he came back to America when he was 10, and he had no experience with racism whatsoever. And he was walking into a march, and he was the only black kid, and all of a sudden people were throwing things at him. It was in the 1960s or 70s. Throwing cans and bottles and bricks at him. And he just didn't understand. He said, what is this about? And he found out about racism. And he wondered, like, how can these people hate me if they don't even know me? And what he did was he went to Ku Klux Klan people and he befriended them and he spoke to them and he listened to them. And he was open to them and he showed empathy towards them. And the result was that he was able to get 200 people outside of the Ku Klux Klan. He got them to give them their capes, their robes to him, and they left the Klan.
What an amazing story. It seems that empathy makes us more effective. And it's easy to feel empathy for non-vegans, because most vegans were once not vegan. And it's obvious that most people aren't eating animals because they want them to be exploited or to suffer. Most people eat meat because most people eat meat. It's a social norm. And remember that to empathize with someone isn't to say that you agree with what they're doing. It's about trying to understand their perspective and acknowledging their feelings, their struggles, and their desires. If you're struggling to empathize with non-vegans, remind yourself that most people do care about animals. Look at the love and compassion people have for their cats and dogs. In many cases, cats and dogs are treated as members of the family, and many meat eaters would risk their lives to save their cat or dog from a fire. Just look at how much compassion people can have for animals. That's something we can work with. While this video has been a bit negative about some of the patterns I see in the vegan movement, I want to end on a positive by saying that I think we should be very optimistic about the future. Veganism is growing. There is an animal rights revolution happening right now, and animal-free alternatives are booming. Much like the way motor vehicles replaced horses in our transport system, animal-free meat can end animal farms and slaughterhouses. Recently in Singapore, the first ever clean meat product was approved for sale. A video about clean meat is coming soon. I was partly inspired by Tobias Leenaert when making this video. He has written and talked about ways that the vegan movement might be improved, and I think he has a lot of good things to say. But let me know what you think in the comment section below. If you enjoyed this video, then please do subscribe and hit the bell icon to be notified when I release new content. And if you find my content valuable, then please do consider supporting me on Patreon. With that said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon with another video.